The city was not dead, but it had forgotten how to breathe. Cale Thorne ran through the broken streets of the outer ring, each footstep splashing through puddles of black rain and shattered neon. Rusted signs blinked in ghost languages. Sirens howled somewhere far behind him, or maybe inside his ears. The world above had collapsed long ago, but it still knew how to scream. His lungs burned. His legs ached. But he couldn't stop. They were close. The scavenger gangs always were. Faster than fear, slower than mercy. Cale didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel their boots pounding the metal behind him, could hear their laughter echo through the ruined tunnels like a sickness. Left, jump, down the shattered stairwell, through the crumbled rail, then a wall, dead end, no door, no hatch, just debris and steel, slick with old oil and time. Cole cursed under his breath. His fingers clawed through the rubble, found the edge of a grate buried beneath broken concrete. He gripped it, pulled with everything he had left. It shrieked, moved just enough. He dropped through the gap. Darkness swallowed him whole. The noise above faded instantly. No footsteps, no yelling. Only the hum of something ancient breathing below the city. He landed hard on metal, rolled. Wincing, he sat up and looked around. No light, no movement. Just the steady drip of water and the soft creak of forgotten structure. Then, faintly, a glow. Blue, gentle, alive. Cale blinked. The light danced through narrow pipes ahead, like it was leading him somewhere. He followed, footsteps careful, every breath slow. The tunnel curved downward, deeper and deeper, until even the air felt older. And then he found it. A chamber opened before him, carved from old stone and tangled with roots that shimmered like veins of starlight. In the center stood a tree of metal and glass, its branches humming softly, casting reflections across the curved walls. Beneath it stood 3 figures, not shadows, not human. They turned in unison, 3 girls, alien, beautiful, wrong and right all at once. One glowed like firelight. One shimmered like the surface of a mirror. The third, still as a blade before it strikes. Cale froze. So did they. Nobody moved. Then he raised his hand slowly and said the only thing that made sense. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." The one in front narrowed her eyes. A long pause. Then, "Shame," she said. "We are." Silence thickened like fog. Cole stood still, arms raised, heart pounding. Not from fear of violence, but from the impossible weight of presence. The 3 girls moved with the grace of creatures who had learned long ago to survive by never blinking first. The one in front, tall, silver-skinned, marked by angular tattoos that shimmered faintly across her collarbone, studied him like a threat she wasn't sure needed killing yet. Her hair was braided back tight, a functional style that matched her stance. Her name came not from her lips, but from the way the others glanced at her when tension peaked. Elira. The second, smaller and almost translucent in the soft blue glow of the chamber, stood near the root structure of the glowing tree. She looked curious, cautious, but her fingers trembled slightly with light, like she was holding back something warm, something healing. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "Should we let him speak?" The third, furthest back, sat on the edge of an old console, sharpening a jagged blade that looked grown rather than forged. Her gaze was flat, analytical. Her armor was made of scavenged plating, fused to her body like scales. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was warning enough. Cale exhaled slowly. "I didn't know anyone lived down here," he said carefully. Elira tilted her head. "That's because no one is supposed to." Cale nodded. I wasn't supposed to fall through your roof either. A pause. Then Solari, the glowing one, stepped forward. Her voice was cautious but not unkind. You're human. Kyle blinked. You say that like it's a threat. No, she replied, like it's a surprise. Elira raised a hand, and Solari stopped. We don't know who he is, Elira said. He could be bait or a scanner node sent to locate us. Cole frowned. If I was bait, I wouldn't be bleeding. He pulled up the sleeve of his jacket, showing a fresh gash across his arm, torn during the fall, not yet treated. Solari flinched, instinctively stepping forward. Elira blocked her with one arm. He's hurt, Solari said. Everyone is hurt, the third girl spoke at last. Her voice was low, mechanical in its calm. That's how they find you when you need. Carl held up both hands again. Look, I'm not part of whatever war you're in. I was running from a gang up top, fell through, that's it. Elira's golden eyes narrowed. Why were they chasing you? He hesitated, then told the truth. Because I stole food for a kid. He was starving. Solari's eyes softened. Even the blade girl, Nyx, he'd learn later, tilted her head slightly. Kale shrugged. I've been running for a long time, but I'm not here to fight. If you want me gone, I'll go. He took a step back, but Elira didn't stop him. Not yet. Solari looked at her leader. He could help. With what? Stabilizing the core, fixing the collector, maybe even getting us out of this tomb. Cole raised an eyebrow. I fix things, if that helps. Nyx snorted. If he breaks anything, I break him. Cole gave her a tired smile. Fair. Elira stared at him for a long time, then nodded once. You stay, one night. Cole exhaled in relief. Solari stepped forward and offered him a small light capsule. For your arm. He took it, fingers brushing hers just briefly, and in that contact something passed between them, not energy, not power. Recognition. 3 alien girls, 1 broken man. A city above that wanted them gone, but down here, for one night, they were something else entirely. Survivors. Cole woke to the sound of humming. Not the mechanical kind, though that buzzed softly from the fusion core across the chamber, but a different tone, organic, musical, almost. When he opened his eyes, he saw Solari crouched near the root light, her hands pressed against one of the glowing veins. She was humming to it, coaxing it alive. The root brightened, casting soft light across her face. She smiled, as if it had said something kind back. Cole sat up slowly. The cot beneath him was rough, but warmer than expected. Someone, probably Solari, had wrapped him in a layered mesh of old cloth and stitched together insulation. He flexed his shoulder, the bandage still holding. A voice spoke from the shadows. She likes to talk to the tree. Says it sings. Kyle turned. Nyx leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, blade sheathed but never far. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone held less edge than before. I've heard stranger things, Kyle replied. Good, this place is stranger things. A moment passed. Nyx didn't move. Why did you help that kid? She asked. Kale blinked. What? Up there, you stole food, risked your neck, for someone else. He hesitated, then answered. Because once, someone did that for me. Nyx studied him, then, without a word, walked away. He didn't know if that was approval or a warning. With her, it might be both. Kyle stood and stretched, taking in the room with clearer eyes. It wasn't just a hideout, it was a home, one cobbled together from fragments of the world above. Solar panels repaired and angled toward broken skylights. Water harvested from ancient filtration pipes. A makeshift garden glowing under artificial sunbursts. Every inch of it whispered effort and survival. Elira appeared beside him, silent as breath. She handed him a metal container. Eat. Inside, a nutrient mash, steaming and earthy. Not appetizing, but hot. He took it with a grateful nod. I didn't expect this, he said. What did you expect? Blades, he answered. Maybe interrogation. Elira's lips twitched. That was Nix's vote. He chuckled softly. They sat together by the tree root, not quite touching, not quite distant. I don't think I've thanked you, he said. You haven't. Thank you. She glanced at him. Don't thank me yet. Coyle ate in silence for a while, then said quietly, You built something beautiful down here. Elira looked around. We didn't build it. We reclaimed it. This place was part of an old vault. Forgotten tech, overgrown. We just reminded it how to live. He nodded slowly. Still, you made it yours. That's rare now. Solari walked over, brushing her hands clean. Kale, you ever work with pulse inverters? He blinked. Once. Why? She grinned. Because our water system's failing and Nix thinks it's cursed. From across the room. I know it is. Kale stood. Let me take a look. They worked together for hours. Coyle crouched under old tubing, tracing faded wires while Solari adjusted regulators and Nix stood guard, eyes never still. Elira mapped out the structure, rerouting energy flow with the elegance of someone who thought in systems, not guesses. And somewhere between the sparks and the laughter and the stubborn bolts, something shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Kale didn't feel like an outsider anymore. He felt useful. He felt welcome. As the night settled again and the lights dimmed to conserve power, the four of them gathered near the center of the room. Not to plan, not to guard, just to sit. Solari handed him a drink, something made from the root garden, sweet and sharp. You're not bad for a stranger, she said. Kyle smiled. You're not bad for terrifying. Elira rolled her eyes, and even Nix in the dark smirked just barely. That night, Kyle slept without dreaming, and the room around him, filled with light and quiet breath, felt almost like a future. The ground trembled, just slightly, not enough to knock anything over, but enough to be wrong. Kyle felt it first. A subtle shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. He was elbow-deep in a pipe junction, trying to reroute heat flow from the lower vents, when the vibration rolled through the floor. Tools rattled. Water in the hydro line pulsed once. Then Nix's voice crackled over the comm. One signal, no 3, heat trace, coming fast. Paul shot to his feet. Above, the girls were already moving. Elira sprinted to the observation node, her fingers flying across the ancient console. Solari stood at the center of the room, palms open, light building between them. Surface breach? Kale asked as he climbed up from the sub-level. Number side corridor, Nix replied. Someone's found our power signature. They're inside the tunnels already? They're hunting, Elira said flatly. And they're close. Coyle's mind went cold. We can't fight them here, not without collapsing everything. Nix nodded. Then we run. They didn't argue. The four of them moved as one, grabbing what they could, packs, tools. Elira tore the map crystal from its port and tucked it into her coat. Solari dimmed the core light, whispering something to it like a goodbye. Kale opened the old service hatch. The air inside was stale and tight, but it led to the old flood tunnels. Long, cracked, forgotten. It also led away. They ducked inside just as the first noise echoed behind them. Not a scream, not footsteps, but laughter, twisted, mocking. Kyle looked back once. Silhouettes entered their chamber, tall, lean, armored in stitched bone and scavenged metal. The scavenger hunters. He had seen them before, felt their breath behind him in the alleys above, but now they were here, and they knew how to track. Nyx dropped a charge behind them, small, just enough to cause a collapse. It boomed as they ran. Tunnel walls shook, dust rained. But the way behind vanished under rubble. They didn't stop. 10 minutes of sprinting through old pipes, rusted ladders, crumbling ducts. Kyle's lungs burned, but he kept going. Solari lit the path ahead, her glow soft and steady. Aelira guided them with the map in her mind, until dead end. A collapsed shaft, sealed with pressure locks and stone. No signal, Nyx muttered. Kale stepped forward, scanning the walls. Wait, I saw this in the lower schematics. There's a secondary valve system. If we open the reserve water main, we can flood this corridor. Aelira's eyes widened and drowned them. Solari hesitated. Will we drown too? Not if I time it right, Kale said, but we have to trust the next passage leads to the surface air duct. Nyx looked at him. You sure? No. A beat. Then she stepped back. Do it. Kale tore open the side panel. Wires sparked. Code flickered. He bypassed the control lock, rewired the manual trigger, and hit the release. Water exploded through the side vent with a roar. The tunnel filled behind them. Kale didn't wait. Run! They sprinted down the final corridor, water crashing at their heels, carrying with it the screams of the scavengers who had been too fast, and not fast enough. The group burst into a collapsed atrium, barely holding itself together. Kale pulled the emergency vent open. Sunlight pierced through the cracks. Actual golden light, the outside. They clambered through one by one, soaked and panting. Silence followed. Only their breathing. And birdsong. Real birds. Kale looked up. They had made it. Nyx fell against the wall, eyes closed, sword still in hand. Aelira knelt in the grass, fingers clutching soil like it was sacred. Solari lay flat on her back, laughing softly to herself. Kale stood, dripping and shaking, and for the first time since the city fell, he laughed too. They found shelter in the husk of an old rail control tower, half swallowed by ivy and time. The walls leaned at awkward angles, but the roof held. For now, that was enough. Cole crouched over a spread of salvaged gear on the floor, wires, detonators, a half-functional comm unit, and a bent schematic of the city's outer perimeter. His hands moved fast, fueled by adrenaline that hadn't worn off since the flood tunnel. Solari knelt beside him, her hands glowing faintly as she fed a slow charge into the comm unit's battery. The light from her palms pulsed in rhythm with Kale's breath. Aelira paced near the shattered window, eyes fixed on the tower ruins beyond. Her voice was low, sharp. They'll regroup. The hunters don't stop. They'll track the water line, scan heat signatures. We've bought hours, not more. Nyx sat on the edge of a broken support beam, cleaning her blade with steady precision. Then we don't give them hours. Cole tapped the map. There's a drone relay hub near the southern wall. It's still active. If we disable it, we cut their eyes in the sky. And then what? Aelira asked. Then we move through the south ruins, hit the power junction near Sector 12, Kyle said. That gives us 1 minute to scramble the wall sensors and run like hell. Solari raised an eyebrow. That's not a plan. That's a prayer with wires. Kyle grinned. It's both. Nyx leaned in. We'll need a distraction. Kyle nodded. I'll do it. Aelira spun. What? I'm the only one they want alive, he said. They'll hesitate just long enough. No, Aelira said. You go with Solari. Nyx and I will plant the scramblers. Cole hesitated. You trust me that much? No, she said, stepping closer. but I trust what happens to us if we lose you." The room fell quiet. Solari looked up, her glow dimming. "We can't run again after this. Either we leave for good, or we don't leave at all." Kyle exhaled. "Then, let's build something that ends in sunlight." They moved. Night fell over the city like a slow curtain. In the dark, Kyle and Solari crept through shattered alleys toward the relay tower. She whispered directions, her voice a soft thread tying him to the path. Her glow stayed dim, just enough to light a step, not enough to give them away. At the relay hub, Kale slipped into the maintenance crawlspace. He worked in silence, fingers remembering the rhythm of sabotage like it was survival. One spark, one bypass, one final code string. The signal died. Above them, the drones blinked out like stars going dark. Halfway across the city, Nix and Alira detonated a static bomb over the sensor grid. Sparks danced across the rooftops. Systems failed. The path opened, but not for long. Cole grabbed Solari's hand. "Run!" They raced through the ruins, dodging collapsed towers and moss-covered debris. Alarms blared behind them, the city waking too late to stop what had already begun. At the final gate, Alira and Nix were waiting. Bloodied, breathing hard, alive. Giles slid through the breach, pulling Solari behind him. They made it. Past the walls, past the city, into wind and stars and open sky. Beyond the city wall, the world was quiet in a way Cole had almost forgotten existed. No sirens, no gunfire, just wind. Dust swirled over cracked planes and the rusted skeletons of forgotten machines. In the distance, dead towers leaned like old men too tired to stand. The sun bled orange through a haze of ash and memory. Coyle stood on the rise of a hill, watching as Alira, Solari, and Nix moved below. Tiny figures in the middle of endless ruin, yet more alive than anything left behind. For the first time in years, he couldn't hear the city breathing down his neck. It was behind them now. The wall they had crossed was barely visible, a jagged shadow on the horizon. They were free. But freedom, he realized, wasn't quiet, it was empty. That night, they made camp near the remains of a collapsed overpass. The steel bones of a bygone road curved like ribs overhead. Kale set up a makeshift windbreak using tarp and old solar panels. Nix found an intact water cache buried under the rubble. Solari coaxed power from a broken light tower, bringing one bulb to life. Its glow was soft, warm, alive. Alira returned last, arms full of dried root vines and fungus scraped from beneath shaded ruins. "Not much," she said. Kyle smiled. "Looks like a feast." They sat around the dim light, sharing silence and food. Nothing tasted good. Everything felt necessary. Solari curled up near the generator, head resting on her arm. She whispered softly to herself in a language Kale didn't know. Probably lullabies. Probably hope. Nix sat with her back to the wind, one hand always near her blade. But even she looked less like a weapon now. Just a girl. A tired, stubborn girl who had survived more than she should have. Alira watched the fireless heat lamp flicker. "We need a place to settle. Somewhere they won't chase us. Somewhere we can build." Carl nodded. "Any ideas?" She looked toward the east. "There are rumors of an old commune, abandoned before the war. Some say the air still filters. Some say the soil still grows." Cole glanced at the others. Solari smiled in her sleep. Nix shrugged. Better than nothing. They left at dawn. No speeches, no plans, just motion. And that was enough. They crossed through dead forests, where trees stood petrified and roots hummed with buried power. Coyle taught them how to extract water from the bark. Solari mapped ley lines of energy. Alira navigated the stars. Nix kept them safe when the silence moved wrong. By the third day, they found it. A slope of land, half sunken, with glass-roofed structures buried beneath soil and time. A greenhouse. Collapsed. A water tank still sealed. A power relay blinking once every 30 seconds. Faint, but alive. They stood in the middle of it, shoulders dusted with ash, lungs full of cold. This could work, Cale said. Elira walked to the heart of the clearing. She knelt, touched the dirt, then smiled. We begin here. It began with a single shovel of dirt. Cole stabbed the rusted blade into the hard-packed soil beside the old greenhouse and exhaled, his breath fogging in the cool morning air. The ground resisted, unused to hands that didn't come to strip it or scorch it. But he pushed again, then again, until the earth began to yield. Behind him, the others moved like an orchestra without words. Elira knelt in the shade of a broken solar array, sketching new layouts into the dust. Her fingers traced ancient Nithan engineering glyphs, overlaying human concepts with alien precision. Energy loops, defensive rings, filtration paths. Solari moved between rubble and possibility, her touch reigniting long-dead conduits. Where her fingers passed, light followed. She spoke to metal like it was sleeping, and it listened. Nyx patrolled the edge of the clearing, but not with the tension of flight. Her eyes scanned the horizon not for escape, but to protect what they were building. This wasn't survival anymore, it was foundation. By midday, the greenhouse frame had been raised, cracked glass replaced with scavenged, transparent plating. Solari tested the water lines, humming softly as pressure returned. The tank shuddered once, then released a soft stream of clean water into the new reservoir. Kyle laughed out loud, not from shock, from the joy of function. That night, they sat under an improvised canopy built from sailcloth and memory. The stars above were clear, no walls, no surveillance, no city hum. A fire crackled at the center. Real fire. Wood Nyx had dragged from a collapsed library outside the commune. Solari handed Cole a warm cup of something sweet and herbal. We could stay, she said. Cole looked at her. Would you want to? Solari nodded. If you asked. Nyx, from her place near the fire, rolled her eyes. We're not making a vow circle, calm down. Elira didn't smile, but she didn't stop Cole when he reached across and took her hand. Her voice was quiet. We name it tomorrow. What? The place, she said. If we build it, it deserves a name. Kyle looked around. The structure taking shape, the pulse of power lines, the soft breath of life beneath tired earth. Then we better build it right. They stayed up late that night, not out of fear, but because none of them wanted to miss a single moment of what they were making. In that silence, something rare bloomed. Not love, not yet, but belonging. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were choosing, and the ground remembered. Dawn broke without permission. Light spilled across the hills in soft amber waves, washing over rusted rail lines, broken towers, and the green shoots of something living clawing its way back from the dust. The air smelled of metal and dew, of ash, yes, but also of firewood and soil. Cale stood on the highest ridge near the edge of the commune, watching the horizon. Elira stepped beside him, barefoot, her long braid wind-tossed, her eyes softer than when they'd met. Behind them, the greenhouse shimmered with light. The water system murmured beneath the ground. Somewhere inside, Solari was laughing about something. Nyx was pretending not to listen. Cole breathed deep. This still feels impossible, he said. Elira looked out into the empty stretch of wild land. Everything good does at first. He turned to her. We've survived. We've built. So, what now? She thought for a long moment, then said, Now we choose. Cole blinked. Choose what? Everything, she replied. Where to grow, who we let in, what we carry forward, what we leave behind. He nodded, slow. The silence between them was full, but not heavy. What would you call this place? He asked. Elira smiled faintly. Home. He smiled back. Later that day, they planted the first seeds in the softest patch of earth near the water line. Not because they were sure it would work, but because trying mattered. So Larry etched names into a curved slab of metal and buried it beneath the first tree. Nix built a wind beacon out of scrap and solar cells. Its light could be seen for miles, and Cole, he wired together an old radio. Every night he played soft static into the air. Not a distress call, not a warning, just a voice. Speaking into the void, telling anyone still listening. There's still something here. There's still someone here, and you are not alone. What would you do if survival gave way to stillness? Would you stay and build on the ashes, or walk again, searching for another storm to hide in? Leave a comment, because maybe the best stories are not the ones that end with victory, but the ones that choose to begin again, together.